Hi class, welcome to week 3, module 3 of the course. I just wanted to make sure you guys have a good understanding of what's expected in module 3. So module 3 you'll be learning about data types and variables. So there's a few key things that you need to make sure that you complete for module 3. The first is, as always, zyBooks. So you have zyBooks reading. You should have read chapters 1 through 4 at this point. Well, chapter 4 is not required but highly recommended. So it's required to read chapters 1 to 3. Again, I highly recommend that you read chapter 4 as well. So in this module, we'll be reading chapter 5 on data types. So this will be very important for the remaining of the course. So understanding data types and applying them are very important, and you'll be applying them in the Stepping Stone Lab 2 in this module as well. So in Stepping Stone Lab 2 for this module, this will be your second Stepping Stone Lab. You'll be applying what you've learned about data types, and you'll be applying it to the ingredient class, working toward the ingredient class of your final project, your final collection manager project. So let's quickly go over what's expected in Stepping Stone Lab 2 by reviewing the Stepping Stone Lab 2 guidelines. So here are the Stepping Stone Lab 2 guidelines. In this Stepping Stone Lab 2, again, you'll be applying what you are going to be learning about basic data types, and you'll be applying it toward the ingredient class. So you'll be working on parts of the ingredient class that you will be able to use for the final project. So remember, everything you're doing in these Stepping Stone Labs are building toward, helping you to build your skills toward completing the final project. So you're taking one step closer toward completing the final project. So what you want to do is you want to start with the Stepping Stone 2 ingredient calculator.java file. So use this file as your template, right? Start here. You're basically going to modify it by addressing what's being asked in these guidelines. And you're going to modify it and then submit your completed modified Stepping Stone 2 ingredient calculator.java file. Okay, so you're going to build on this ingredient in code that reflects the variables, such as its name, the number of cups that the ingredient needed in the recipe, and how many calories it has per cup. You can also write an expression, so you're going to use arithmetic as well and apply that in your code to calculate the total number of calories this ingredient would contribute to the recipe. Okay, so this is all again laid out here in this table as well. So these are the different variables that you'll need to include, and these are just giving you an idea of what type of values are being stored, but you're going to have to determine the Java data type that's going to be needed to be used for each of these different variables. Okay, so again, start with the Stepping Stone 2 ingredient calculator.java file, modify it, assign the appropriate data types to each of these variables, and then the final step, you're going to write an expression that multiplies the number of cups by the number of calories per cup and assign that value to total calories variable. Okay, so that's the second step where you can actually do some math, do some arithmetic in Java. Okay, so all that's going to be done in that file, and this is something you're going to submit. So another piece that is in this file is you can adapt it or extend it to the final project. So these are modifications or additions that you will make, and you'll see this in all the Stepping Stone Labs. You'll be able to make these modifications that will help you toward completing the final project, right? So these are more specific to the final project. Now, this is not required, and you should not turn this in. Do not turn. If you do extend it and then make the modifications and additions for the final project, this part here, do not submit that part. Keep that separate from the Stepping Stone Lab, right? So you want to make sure that you just complete what's being asked for in the Stepping Stone Lab 2 guidelines. And anything for extending the lab for the final project, keep that separate. Do not submit that. You're just going to be using that as you build toward your final project that you'll be submitting toward the end of the 10 weeks. Okay, the other document that you should review even prior to working on Stepping Stone Lab 2, you should review this, is the Stepping Stone Lab 2 through 6 rubric. Okay, so this outlines what's going to be expected, what kind of things you're going to be working on for each of the Stepping Stone Labs 2 to 6. So you can see that here in this table. And it also mentions that you're going to be needing to submit 2 things for every stepping stone lab from 2 to 6. You're going to be submitting the code, right? So the code. So for in this case, stepping stone lab 2, you'll be submitting the .java file, the modified template that's given for stepping stone lab 2 ingredient calculator.java, right? So you'll be submitting that completed code. And the second part you'll need to submit is the written reflection as a text file or Word document. So this is very important. So you want to make sure for every stepping stone lab 2 from 2 to 6 that you submit as well the written reflection. So this written reflection will contain certain pieces. So if you read these critical elements here, you'll see everything and it'll explain what's expected for the code reflection. So you need to make sure you always include a brief explanation of the code, its purpose, and a brief discussion of your experience in developing it, and include any issues that you encountered while completing the stepping stone and what approaches you took to solve them. So you have to make sure you address each of these points, right, to get full credit, because this is going to be part of your grade. You're going to be graded on your code reflection, and if you included each of these, addressed each of these points. Okay. So make sure to read what's expected for specifications, correctness, readability, annotation. And one key thing to note about readability and annotation is that for readability, you want to make sure that you use proper white space, blank lines between different pieces of code that are not related. Make sure you use indentation where necessary. You want to make sure your code looks clean. It looks professional. It's clean and ready to be submitted, right? So you want to make sure it's clear and readable, and just go through these different points to better understand that. And then there's also annotation. So annotation is your comments. So commenting. You want to make sure that all your code is well commented. This is extremely important. Commenting your code is almost as important as writing the code itself. It's going to be helpful for you to kind of keep track of the logic, of the flow of your code. And if you ever needed to go back to make modifications, you can look through your comments to understand what's going on at each point of your code. So this is going to be very important for yourself as well as others. When you submit your code, for example, submitting to me, I can have a better understanding on what you're trying to do at each step. So if you didn't get something right, at least I can see what you're attempting to do by reading the comments at that point of the code. So you always want to make sure you comment your code. Now you don't want to over comment. You don't want to comment every single line of every single piece of code, but you should have a good amount of commenting at each section of your code so you can have a good understanding of the flow and what's going on at each point. So make sure you address these pieces. Again, they're outlined here. So this is the rubric that's going to be used for grading. So you want to make sure you follow this very clearly and make sure you address each of these points. Look at the proficient column, as this is what you'll need to complete to get full credit. So these are the point values here. You want to make sure you have your code reflections, that written document with your stepping stone labs, and then address all of these points here. Finally, just wanted to go through this document here. This is this IT-511 stepping stone overview document. So this kind of goes through all of the stepping stone labs and explains what they are, so a description, as well as how they connect to the final project. So you should have read this before, but I just want to emphasize this is important for understanding the purpose of each of these stepping stone labs. It's good to understand the big picture and why you're working on this lab and how it contributes to the final project and what is expected to learn and get out of each of these stepping stone labs. So I strongly recommend that you read through this, even before that week. Read through it, the entire document now, so that you have a good understanding on what's expected and where each stepping stone lab, the current stepping stone lab, fits within the big picture. Okay, so this is hopefully you have a good understanding of what's expected in Module 3. Again, please submit both stepping stone lab 2 code, right, the modified stepping stone lab 2 ingredient calculator.java file, as well as the code reflection, right, as a text document or a Word document. Okay, so make sure you include these, zip them up, and submit that. Okay, so this is the 2 files you should be submitting. And then as well as always completing the zyBooks reading, Chapter 5, and all of the participation activity associated with that reading. And it's highly recommended to complete the challenge activities as well, although the challenge activities are not required. And continue to make use of the discussion topics, both general questions, to ask any questions you may have about the reading or the labs, whatever it may be. And also the coding community section is a good place to post to just get help from your peers and myself with various different challenge activities or code snippets that you might be having trouble with, or might need additional help with, or trouble debugging, or whatever it may be. Post those coding questions there. Okay, hope this all makes sense, and if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Thanks.